The dog hit the door before it finished opening, not barking, not growling. Just 110 pounds of Belgian Malinois throwing itself against the frame hard enough to rattle the hinges, and every person in the hallway took a step back without deciding to. Every person except Sable Mercer. She stood at the threshold of room 14 with a blood pressure cuff in one hand and a chart she hadn't finished reading in the other, and she looked at the dog the way she looked at most things that were trying to frighten her, steadily, without blinking, cataloging. The dog's name, according to the intake paperwork, was Kodak. The man on the bed, according to the same paperwork, was listed only as J. Navarro, U.S. Navy, and the line where his unit should have been was blank in a way that told her everything she needed to know about what kind of unit it was. Navarro had come in 40 minutes ago through the ambulance bay, 2 federal agents flanking the gurney and a handler jogging alongside who hadn't said a single word to anyone, not even when they took Navarro into surgery prep, and told the handler he couldn't follow. The handler, a compact, weathered man named Reyes, had looked at the agents, then at the door, then at Kodak. He'd said something to the dog in a language Sable didn't recognize, not Spanish, something shorter. Military shorthand, maybe, or a command language trained into Kodak's bones before Reyes ever got him. Then Reyes had been escorted out, and Kodak had stayed. No one had quite figured out how to undo that arrangement. The surgery had taken 3 hours. Navarro was in recovery now, and Kodak was stationed at the foot of the bed, with his eyes fixed on the door, with the absolute airless certainty of an animal who had been given one job and intended to finish it. Sable was the third nurse to try to enter the room. The first had made it 2 steps inside before Kodak's posture shifted in a way that made her walk backward without turning around. The second had tried talking first, soft voice, slow movements, the thing you did with frightened animals, and Kodak had looked at her with an expression that wasn't fear. It was assessment. He'd looked at her the way a security camera looks at you, cataloging, and she'd felt it and left. Dr. Renwick had suggested sedating the dog. The federal agent posted outside the room, a tall woman named Burroughs who communicated almost entirely in pauses, had said that wasn't going to happen. So Sable tried. She took 1 step inside. Kodak's head turned. His ears didn't flatten, which she knew was a good sign, but his body dropped into something lower and more loaded, a posture that said, "I am not afraid of you, and that is the problem." "I know," Sable said, not loudly. "He's right there. I'm going to check on him. That's all." Kodak didn't move. She took another step. The dog made a sound, not a bark, not a growl, something between those 2 things, a frequency that sat in the chest instead of the ears. Sable stopped. She stood very still and looked at Navarro, who was unconscious and pale and breathing through oxygen, and she thought about the way the intake paperwork had that empty line where his unit should have been. She thought about what it cost a person to have a blank line on their own medical record, to exist in the official documentation as a name and a branch, and nothing else. She thought about her brother, who'd had a blank line too. She didn't move toward Navarro. She pulled the visitor's chair from the corner, slowly, scraping it across the floor so Kodak could track the sound, and she sat down just inside the doorway, not advancing, not retreating, just present. Kodak watched her. She checked her watch. She had 12 minutes before her next obligation. She spent 11 of them sitting in that chair, doing nothing threatening, while Kodak decided what she was. On the 12th minute, he sat down, not relaxed, still watching, but sitting, which was different from that loaded, coiled crouch, and Sable took it for what it was, not permission, but the beginning of a conversation. She stood up, replaced the chair, and walked out. "Well," said Agent Burroughs from her position against the wall, in a tone that suggested mild surprise was the most emotion she permitted herself. "Tomorrow," Sable said, and went back to her other patients. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing. There wasn't really anything to tell. She came back to the doorway of room 14 4 more times over the next 16 hours, and each time she stayed a little longer and moved a little closer, and Kodak watched her with those amber eyes and made calculations she wasn't entirely able to read. On the second day, she made it to the foot of the bed. Navarro was still unconscious for most of it, which was intentional. He'd lost significant blood and his body needed the quiet. But on the second evening, his eyes opened and found the ceiling, and then, slowly, found Kodak, and something in his face changed. Not relief exactly, something older than relief. something that looked like a man confirming that the world still contained the one thing he'd been certain of. "Hey," Sable said from the foot of the bed. Navarro's eyes moved to her. They were dark and very alert for someone who'd been under for 36 hours, the kind of alert that didn't switch off when you wanted it to. "Who are you?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "Sable Mercer. I'm one of your nurses." He looked at Kodak. Kodak was looking at Sable with an expression she was starting to learn, still watchful, but without that loaded quality. "He let you in," Navarro said. "Eventually." A pause. "He doesn't do that, I noticed." Something shifted in Navarro's face, not quite a smile. "What did you do?" "Sat in the doorway for 11 minutes and didn't do anything threatening." He was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved to the window, to the dark outside, and then back. "How long have I been here? 2 days." She watched him take that in. The way he processed it was different from the way most patients processed lost time. There was no panic, no disorientation, just a kind of rapid recalibration, like a compass needle swinging back to north. "My handler," he said. "Rise. He's been outside. They've been keeping him in the family waiting area." She paused. "He's been there the whole time." Something crossed Navarro's face that he didn't fully control, and then he controlled it. "The injury," he said. "You had a fragment in the left side close to the kidney. The surgery went well. You lost more blood than we'd like, but you're not going to lose the kidney." She watched him. "Do you want more than that right now, or is that enough?" "That's enough," he said. He closed his eyes. She thought he'd gone back under, but after a moment he spoke again, without opening them. "Sable," he said. "Yes, don't let them move me." She didn't ask who them was. "I can't control federal agents. I'm not asking you to control them." A pause. "I'm asking you to tell me if they try." She considered that. "Okay," she said. When she looked at Kodak, he was still watching her, but his posture had changed again. It was almost imperceptible, a loosening somewhere in the shoulders, a degree less tension in the jaw, but Sable had been reading bodies for 8 years, human and otherwise, and she felt it. She walked back to the door. "Mercer," Navarro said, eyes still closed. She stopped. "What did you do before this?" She'd been a nurse for 8 years. Before that, she'd been something else, briefly, in a life that felt like it belonged to a different person. One who wore a different kind of uniform and kept very different hours and had a brother who was still alive. "Something else," she said. She left before he could ask what. The trouble started on the 3rd day. It started the way trouble usually started in Sable's experience, not with something loud, but with something small and wrong, a detail that didn't fit the way a note off key doesn't fit a chord. She was reviewing the medication log outside room 14 when she noticed the Tintam's discrepancy. A scheduled antibiotic dose logged at 2:17 a.m., 15 minutes ahead of the nurse who'd actually entered the room. She read it twice. Then she went to the medication room and checked the dispensing record. The antibiotic had been drawn at 2:09 a.m. by a badge number that didn't match the nurse on the log. She stood in the medication room for a long moment, looking at the record. Then she walked to the nursing station, pulled up the badge access log for the 3rd floor, and started working backward. It took her 12 minutes. At the end of 12 minutes, she had a name. Terrence Hollis, who was a night shift orderly with 18 months at Beaumont Regional and a spotless record, and had badged into the medication room at 2:09 a.m. and out of it at 2:12, and then badged past the 3rd floor security door at 2:14, and then, according to the external log, not back out again until 2:28. Room 14 was at the end of the 3rd floor corridor. Sable went to Agent Burroughs. "I need you to look at something," she said. Burroughs looked at the records. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Stay here," and made a phone call, turned away, so Sable could see the back of her head but couldn't read her mouth. When she turned back, her face was the same as it always was, which was its own kind of information. "Where's Hollis now?" she said. "Day shift. He came on at 7. Otto, do you know what floor?" "No." Burroughs made another call. Sable stood still and tried not to think about the fact that someone with a badge had been in a medication room at 2 in the morning and spent 14 minutes unaccounted for on a floor where a man with a blank line on his paperwork was recovering in room 14. She also tried not to think about what Navarro had asked her. "Don't let them move me." She'd thought he meant the federal people. The ones with clearances and careful voices who'd escorted his handler out and posted Burroughs in the hall. She was revising that now. Hollis was found on the second floor near the supply elevators, and whatever happened after that happened quietly and out of Sable's sight. She was sent back to her other patients. Burroughs moved from her position outside room 14 to somewhere Sable couldn't see, replaced by a man in plain clothes who had the same quality Burroughs had, that particular stillness of someone who had learned to stand in one place for a very long time. The rest of the day was ordinary, or as ordinary as things got when a federal agent was posted at the end of your hall. In the late afternoon, she went back to room 14. Navarro was awake, sitting up slightly, and Kodak was in the same position he'd been in since the beginning, at the foot of the bed watching the door. But something was different now. Kodak's ears were forward, and his eyes were on Sable, and he wasn't making that low-loaded sound. He was just watching. "You found something," Navarro said when she walked in. "I found a discrepancy in the medication log." "What happened?" "I told Agent Burroughs. I don't know what happened after that. They didn't tell me." He nodded slowly. He was looking at her with that same alert, cataloging quality as the first time he'd been conscious, but it had a different texture now. "Kodak didn't alert," he said. "No, he would have. If someone had gotten into the room." He paused. "Hollis didn't get into the room. I know. Whatever was in that log was either a deterrent run, seeing if the room was accessible, or something meant to be found later." She stopped. "I don't know which." "Which do you think?" She considered. "Deterrent run. Someone checking whether the system was being watched." He was quiet for a moment. "That's what I think too." Outside, the afternoon light was going flat and gray, and the hospital sounds filtered in. The intercom, the distant squeak of a cart, someone's monitor alarm that cut off almost immediately. The ordinary sounds of a place that ran all day and all night and didn't really rest. "Mercer," Navarro said. "Yes." He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Kodak, and Kodak looked back at him with that total attention dogs gave the people they'd chosen, and something passed between them that Sable couldn't read but could feel. "The first night you came to the door," he said. "Kodak didn't alert. She waited. He's trained to alert on specific categories of person, threat profiles." Navarro shifted slightly, careful of his side. "He didn't put you in any of them. I sat in the doorway for 11 minutes. That wasn't why." He looked at her arm. Not her face, her left forearm where the sleeve of her scrubs had ridden up slightly. He saw the scar. Sable went very still. The scar was small, 2 inches along the underside of her left forearm, the particular shape that combat medics picked up in a specific context, from a specific kind of incident, in a specific operational environment. It was the kind of scar that told a story to people who knew how to read it. Not many people knew how to read it. Kodak apparently did. "Where?" Navarro said quietly, not asking where the scar was, asking where she'd gotten it. Sable pushed the sleeve back down. "That's not a conversation I'm having in this room." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He didn't push it. That was the thing about people from that world. They understood that some things lived behind doors that stayed closed, and they didn't try to open them because they had their own closed doors. "My brother," she said after a moment. Navarro waited. He was with the 75th. He didn't come back. She looked at the window. "I was a combat medic for 2 years before he died, and I left after. The scar is from before." She paused. "I've been a nurse here for 4 years. Most people don't ask. Most people can't read it." No, he was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry about your brother," he said, in a tone that meant he'd said those words before, in contexts where they cost something to say. "Thank you," she said, in a tone that meant she'd heard them before, and knew the difference between the versions. Kodak stood up from the foot of the bed, walked 2 steps toward Sable, and sat down directly in front of her. He looked up at her, not threatening, not assessing, just looking. Sable looked back at him for a long moment, and then she crouched down and let him smell her hand, and when he pressed the top of his head against her palm, she understood that it wasn't permission he was granting her. It was something else. Recognition, maybe. The acknowledgement that she belonged to the same category as the man on the bed, not by unit, not by rank, but by the particular kind of wound that didn't show up on a chart. She stayed crouched there for a moment. Then she stood up and finished taking Navarro's vitals, and they didn't talk about her brother again. On the 4th morning, Agent Burroughs came back. She stood at the threshold of room 14. Kodak watched her with polite, complete indifference, and she told Navarro that the situation with Hollis had been resolved. in a tone that made resolved mean something more complicated than it looked. She said that transport would be arranged in the next 24 hours. She said it would be quiet. Navarro said, "Raise." Burroughs said she'd make sure Reyes was part of the transfer. After she left, Navarro lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling in the way he had. That particular stillness that wasn't unconsciousness but wasn't entirely rest either. "You're going to be okay," Sable said. It came out more direct than she intended. "Yeah," he said. "I know, the kidney's going to be fine. You lost function temporarily, but everything we're seeing suggests full recovery." She paused. "The fragment was close, but it missed." "It missed," he repeated, in a tone that made it sound like an old joke between him and the universe. "Go ahead and laugh. Gallows humor is the most valid coping mechanism I know of." He did laugh, a short, real sound that made Kodak look up sharply and then settle again. "That's not something they tell you in medical school. I didn't go to medical school. I went to the army and then to nursing school, and I think my perspective is more accurate." He looked at her. "Probably." She was checking his chart when he spoke again. "Hollis wasn't acting alone," he said. "You probably know that. She did know that in the way she knew a lot of things she wasn't supposed to know, from years of reading rooms, reading paperwork, reading the gaps in what people said. It's not my case," she said. "No. And I'm not going to ask about it. I know." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not why I said it." He paused. "I said it because you found it. You saw one wrong timestamp and pulled the thread, and if you hadn't..." He stopped. She understood what the sentence was going to be. She didn't need him to finish it. "You were going to be moved," she said, "to somewhere the room wasn't being watched." He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. He looked at Kodak, who was watching both of them now with his amber eyes and his complete, uncomplicated loyalty to the man on the bed. "The timestamp was 15 minutes off," Sable said. "Yeah, 15 minutes is the kind of thing people miss. Especially on night shift. Yeah, I wasn't supposed to be checking that log. I was doing a coverage review for a colleague and it was in the file." She paused. If she'd done her own coverage review, but she didn't. No, he was looking at her. "Why were you doing her coverage review?" "She has a new baby. She's exhausted." "I was helping." Sable clicked the chart closed. It was nothing dramatic. Navarro's expression did something quiet and complicated. "That's usually how it goes," he said finally. "The things that matter, they're usually nothing dramatic." He transferred the next morning, early, before the day shift fully came on. Reyes was there. Sable saw him from the nursing station, still compact, still weathered, walking alongside the gurney with the ease of someone who'd done this many times. Kodak walked on Navarro's other side, not on a leash, just there, and the sight of it was something she would think about later. The geometry of it, the way the three of them moved together, like a thing that had been built to be exactly that. Agent Burroughs paused at the nursing station on her way out. "You'll be contacted," Burroughs said, "for the record. The access log, the medication discrepancy. They'll want a formal statement, that's fine." Burroughs paused in a way that felt slightly different from her other pauses. "You did good work." "I noticed a timestamp," Sable said. "That's the job." "Yes," Burroughs said. "It is." She left. Sable stood at the nursing station for a moment, looking at the empty hallway where the three of them had been. Then the charge nurse appeared at her shoulder to say that the patient in 9 was asking about his breakfast, and the woman in 12 needed her dressing changed and could Sable cover the end of the east wing while Pryor was on break, and Sable said yes to all of it. She went back to work. The formal statement happened 2 weeks later in a conference room on the administrative floor and lasted an hour and 40 minutes. Sable told the investigators what she'd seen. She answered their questions. She didn't speculate and she didn't elaborate, which she could tell slightly frustrated one of the investigators and didn't seem to affect the other one at all. When it was over, one of them, the unfrustrated one, a woman named Elaine Stroud, who had the same quality of stillness as Burroughs and who Sable suspected worked for an agency without a public-facing website, set down her pen and looked at Sable for a moment. "We're aware of your previous service," Stroud said. "Okay," Sable said. "There's nothing required of you. I want to be clear about that. I know. But if you were ever interested in a different kind of conversation..." Stroud slid a card across the table. It had a phone number and nothing else. Sable looked at the card. She didn't pick it up right away. She thought about the timestamp, the 15 minutes that shouldn't have been there. The thread she'd pulled because she was doing a favor for an exhausted colleague with a new baby, and what happened because she had. She thought about her brother, who'd had a blank line on his paperwork, who'd believed in doing things that mattered in ways that didn't get documented. She thought about Kodak pressing the top of his head against her palm, in the room at the end of the hall, recognizing something in her that she'd spent 4 years trying to keep quiet. She picked up the card. "I'm not promising anything," she said. "I'm not asking you to," Stroud said. Outside the window, the day was ordinary. Traffic, cloud cover, a flag moving in the wind. The kind of day that looked exactly like itself, with no indication of what was inside it. Sable put the card in her pocket and walked out.